Hello everyone, I am Destro, and this is Realm of the Lich King. If you're a new viewer, welcome, and if you're an old viewer, welcome back. For May the 4th this year, I wanted to do something Star Wars related, so I grabbed the Star Wars Legion core box here, mostly because I want to paint General Grievous, because I think he's cool. And we're going to dig into this thing, see how fast you can get the entire box painted up and ready to play. So, first step, gotta crack this thing open and take a look at what's inside the box. Rulebook, tokens and things, and we have miniatures. So I was prepared for this one. Floppy lightsaber syndrome. Yep, sure enough. This is common with softer plastic miniatures, and mine is no different. Fortunately, easy enough to fix. Dunk it in some hot water, and it does need to be pretty hot, and then straighten it out by hand and shove it in some ice water to get it to set up properly. Once that's done, it'll be straight. Assembly for these minis took 6.5 hours, with about 2/3 of that spent on the droids. The droids are hard plastic and go together with plastic cement, while the clones are PVC and require superglue. While I get on with that in the background, I want to talk a little about the purpose of this video. By doing the whole box, I hope to show how quick and easy it can be to paint up these Star Wars minis, and maybe convince some people to take up painting if they bought it just to play. This is also part of a May 4th Star Wars video celebration between myself and a bunch of other channels, and once you're done watching this video, go check those guys out. Links will be in the description below, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. For now, I've kind of run out of things to say, and I don't want to bore you guys with too much assembly. I did record all of it, but there's a lot, so moving on. So the speeder comes with weapon options. You get this rocket launcher, and then there's a laser gun and a little ion thing. And the rocket launcher goes with that torso, and the laser things goes with this torso. But here's the thing. They have been nice enough to supply you with 2 torsos and 2 heads. Meaning that if you want to swap these out, all you need to do is leave this joint unglued, and you can just trade the torsos out as you see fit. So that's what I'm gonna do. And there we go, everybody assembled. Total time, 6.5 hours. Now, this is supposed to be a speed paint, and as much as that hurts my soul, it does mean everybody here is getting a really quick and dirty, rapid-fire paint scheme. All over dry brush of white, and some apothecary white contrast for the clone armor is all I did. Guns and brow visor got dark gray, and then were covered over with black ink. Gloves also got black ink, as did the helmet visor. Filled everything in just real quickly. 2 of these guys are unit leaders and have an extra strap. Use your brown favorite paint of choice. And then I wanted to add some more color to these guys. You could just leave them as is, but I didn't want to. I wanted to add a little bit to make the unit more distinct, so I did orange shoulder pads, knee pads, and gloves. These are Obi-Wan's unit, their color is orange. This particular guy's a unit leader, so he's getting some blue on his helmet. I decided he was going to be a lieutenant, and in the lore, blue is the color lieutenants get. The other unit leader got green to be a sergeant. The speeder that the clones get is a bit of a larger model, and I didn't speed paint it as hard as I really could have. But even so, it still only took me a little over an hour to finish the speeder itself. I painted it in off-white. You can use whatever sort of off-white gray you like, and I made sure that I got a little bit of that onto the dark sea blue that I'd used for those seats. All of the little smaller vents and details and things were filled in with gray, and I also did a few panels on the armor here and there with that darker gray, just to, promote visual interest. That's a thing that Star Wars does a lot, is slightly differently colored armor panels. Slightly different dark gray goes onto all of the struts and things, and then those get black ink, same as we did for the guns and troops. Canonically, these speeders are supposed to have some red markings, and I did want to represent that. The red that I'm using here is carmine red, which doesn't cover super well, so you might need 2 thin coats to make it work, but once it does, it looks pretty good. Of course, it wouldn't be a Lich King project with a little bit of unnecessary freehand somewhere, so I brought in some orange to tie these in with the rest of the clones. Then it was black.
contrast black to be specific, covered up the seats, and did panel lining on all of the armor panels. Strictly speaking, these are unnecessary extra steps, and you could very well skip them, the panel lining and weathering and things that I'm doing here with this foam brush, but they didn't take that much extra time, and they add a lot to the final result. Of the 3 extra things I did, the panel lining was the most time consuming by far, and this last final bit of weathering around the intakes and bottom with really thinned down sepia ink was the fastest. For my money, speed painting should be about maximum results with minimum effort. Speaking of, it's time for a blink and you'll miss it approach to the droids. The battle droids got the same sort of overbrush treatment as the clones, except I used deck tan on these guys instead of white. Simple overbrush on the entire miniature. Strictly speaking, I even did a little bit of extra on these guys by adding some blue stripes to the backpacks. I could have stuck with just the tan overbrush, and it would have still worked fine, but I wanted that little splash of color in there. The basic droids only got it on their backpacks, the unit leaders got some on the head as well. The guns got the same dark gray as the clones, but they ended up being a little bit different because I decided not to do black, instead opting for an all-over wash of Skeleton Horde contrast paint to the entire droid. And as you can see here, covering up that whole droid adds a lot of detail. There's a lot of fun little lines and greeblings and things on Star Wars miniatures that really lend themselves well to the use of contrast paint. Even then, this could have been skipped, but it adds so much for so little effort I felt it was worth doing. The 2 droids specifically that have rocket launchers, I decided to go with black for those. The destroyer droids, funny enough, are one of the few places in the movies that I think metallics actually show up. Most of the guns and things are just black, so I covered these guys entirely in gunmetal, dry brush, same way as the others.
So here we have the destroyer droid completely covered in metallics. But Distro, you say, destroyer droids have red-brown carapaces. And you'd be correct.
But it turns out that contrast over metallics is magic, and so just by painting a little bit of Gorgrunta fur over top of the gunmetal, we end up with this sort of nice shiny metallic red-brown. Really easily. Out of all the minis in this box, the destroyers probably have the biggest disconnect between how hard it was to assemble them and how hard it was to paint them. A few little red dots for the eyes and an all-over wash of black ink are really all you need to do to bring these together. And in case you doubt the necessity of the black ink wash even, I do have a comparison.
So just a quick comparison, you can see this one here I have done the wash, and this one I have not done the wash. Makes a ton of difference.
Compared to that, this last step probably is unnecessary, but it was a really quick thing, only a few seconds really, and I wanted to do it to make those cables stand out a little. With all the rank and file thus out of the way, it's time to say hello there to our 2 commanders. Obi-Wan, of course, gets the same all-over white dry brush for his robes and armor as the clones did, but since he's a protagonist who doesn't have to wear a helmet, I had to break out the flesh tones and yellow for him and his hair as well. For the most part, Obi-Wan and General Grievous were both painted with the holy trinity of miniature painting: base coat, wash, and highlight. Obi-Wan's robes started with bone. I wanted them to be a little bit different from the way that the droids ended up looking, and I knew that I was going to use Skeleton Horde on them. And the lightsaber, of course, got a sort of bluish off-white. Obi-Wan's appearance here, by the way, is based on his appearance in the Clone Wars animated show. In the films, he never wore this armor. The robe was there, but the armor wasn't. And so it's to the animated series that I've looked to for some inspiration in painting Obi-Wan. I tried to do some highlights to the hair, I think, before I did the red-brown wash to it, but in retrospect I'm not sure how well this comes through, and it's a step that you could probably skip if you really wanted to save a few minutes. The robe and the utility belt both got more contrast paint. Fabric is a great surface for it, as it flows into the recesses. Contrast paint is a tool like anything else, and I don't like using it for large flat surfaces as it does tend to pool, but fabric and small detailed objects are a good place to really let it shine. The gloves and lightsaber got black ink to finish them off, and then we did the face, which is the one round of highlighting that I consider absolutely necessary.
Now, you could entirely leave him here, maybe with a slightly darker blue on his lightsaber. But I'm going to go a little bit further, because this guy's a commander.
Thanks for the lead-in past me. Mostly, these extra steps, and taking a little bit further, amounted to a round of highlights. some bone on the robes, and some white for the armor. This did have the effect of making Obi-Wan look a little bit more bright and shiny than the clones, but whatever. The lightsaber I painted with a little bit of blue shade and a little highlight of white right near the hilt. And then it was time for more Lich King egregious freehand time. Obi-Wan's armor is supposed to have the Jedi Order logo on the shoulder, and so I did my best to use the orange and do an approximation of that here. Time into the rest of the Force, appease cannon, and fulfill my freehand quota. 3 birds, 1 stone. General Grievous is the last miniature in the box, and for me, kind of the highlight of the box. It was also a good opportunity to test out some of my new metal color paints. I wanted his metal to be a bit of a darker color, and I didn't think gunmetal would quite cut it, so I went with steel. Then I coated all the armor panels in a light deck tan and overbrushed the entire thing, once again, with wash. This was black and sepia mixed together, and I put it over the entire miniature, and that was kind of it. Grievous was really simple to paint. Now, I did come back in and do a few gunmetal highlights and things, and of course touched up the armor panels where the inks had just made them a little bit too dark. I wanted him to be sort of gritty and grimy, but, not too much so. If tabletop standard is all you're after, you really could leave him with just the metallic base, the armor panels, and a wash over everything. Even including a quick touch-up on the panels, that only really took me about half an hour, and then it was only 10 minutes to add in all the extra highlights and details and things. Used yellow for the eyes, and then of course onto the lightsabers. Ah yes, once more, slow motion, thank you. Grievous's lightsabers were in blue and green. I did 2 of each, and I'm not showing painting the blue ones because I painted them the same way as I did for Obi-Wan. The trick with this is to draw the ink out towards the end of the lightsaber so you get less of it near the base. The lightsaber is the last detail on the last model, so with that we've painted everything. Oh right, the barricades. Okay, well, no problem. We'll just get some black wash, slap that on those real quick, and then just give them a quick dry brush to finish them off, and that'll be every miniature in the box. And then we're done, right? Okay, not quite done, still need to do the bases, and this is a step that ended up adding a lot of extra time for me. I started out by gluing a bunch of fake plants to these guys because I wanted to give them jungle bases. This was a mistake for time's sake, but it does look cool in the end. With the plants in place, cover the entire base in texture paste. For this I'm using some thick mud texture paste because it's a darker brown than the stuff that I make myself. Since texture paste covereth sins, this is an opportunity to hide the joins to the plants on the base. Oh, and don't forget the shoes. Clones and droids both have a bunch of running and walking poses. Next up we need some ground cover, so it's time for the power of Italian seasoning. This is just a pack of oregano from the grocery store, soaked in a little bit of water and a lot of PVA. The glue will help seal it so that it won't break down later on. With a bit more PVA, I glued down some Woodland Scenics coarse turf. This looks a little bit out of place now, but we'll use some paint to tie it in later. Speaking of tying things in with paint, the oregano didn't blend in enough, so I gave that a wash of burnt umber. All of the plants in the coarse turf got a wash of black-green ink. This adds shading and helps to make those plants look a lot less like plastic. Once that was dry, I went in with a really bright poisonous green to kind of add some more color and definition to the plants, and I used it on the turf as well. Using the same color on both of those elements really helps bring the base together. For plants and other natural elements, irregularity is king. You want to feather the brush on big flat surfaces like this one especially, so you leave a lot of irregular splotches. Regular highlights would look fake. That was it for the actual details on the bases though. The last thing to do was paint the base rims. I decided to go with red for the dark side miniatures and blue for the light side miniatures, because why mess with the classics, right? All told, my chosen basing scheme ended up adding a lot of extra time to this build. If you'd picked a simpler basing scheme that you could do with just texture paste, you might be looking at about an hour to finish off the final basing. With all of the plants and ground cover and extra painting that I did, it ended up being more like 5 hours. So how did I do? All told, assembly took 6.5 hours, and I don't think you could really cut that down by much. painting was 3 hours 45 for the clones, and only 2.5 for all the droids. The biggest potential time save here would be on the speeder, or making use of an airbrush for base coats. I used a normal brush for everything because I want to make this more accessible. Not everyone has an airbrush. Obi-Wan was 50 minutes, Grievous was 40, and you could maybe shave 20 minutes off of that by skipping highlights. The biggest time sink was the bases, as I've said. 5 hours for those. Add it all up, and I had the entire box game ready in just over 19 hours. Less than a single day, albeit one in which you do nothing but hobby. Spread it out, or cut a few corners here and there, you could easily go from new in box to painted and on the table in a weekend. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching, but don't think I've forgotten my fellow creators. Drew at 9 Table Hobbies has done a similar thing to me, painting the entire box, but with some extra terrain thrown in. Bjorn, of the Bear and the Brush, painted up Boba Fett. Yoshi's Painting has a video on why you should play Legion, and the Basic Brush has one on Star Wars games you should check out. Links in the description, go give those guys some love. I've been Destro, you've been great, and I'll see you next time.